But we will go on now to the news of the week in the presidential campaign, beginning with a very simple fact. Presidents don't debate, but presidential candidates have to debate in order to win the presidency, a job where they then will not have to debate. Most American presidents have been elected without ever debating. Debates do not actually test the skills necessary to be president, and most of the political news media does not seem to realize that, and I will have much more to say about that at the end of this hour, and about how we can improve debates and the work that you actually have to do as a viewer and a voter when you are watching the debates. It shouldn't be a passive exercise. You should be listening and thinking and ignoring much of what happens in presidential debates, especially the games sometimes played by some of the moderators. And this week, the moderators' game, which was probably urged on them by their bosses, was to trap the candidates into fighting with each other, trap Democrats into fighting with Democrats. One candidate refused to do that, even when specifically invited by the moderator to attack a specific candidate. One candidate simply refused to play that game. One candidate rose above the CNN game and never criticized another candidate on that stage. The candidate who wouldn't play the game, the candidate who only attacked Donald Trump in the debates, will be our first guest tonight. That candidate went from the debate stage to fighting Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor today, on the last day of work in the Senate before the August recess. In the week since Joe Scarborough started calling Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch, that label has stuck and is now being used by Democrats in Kentucky in a way that has Mitch McConnell worried about his re-election campaign in Kentucky. Senator McConnell got stuck with the label Moscow Mitch when he chose to repeatedly block legislation designed to strengthen our election system against another attack by the Russian government. Mitch McConnell says the legislation is partisan, and that's why he blocked it. But that is not true. One of the bills Mitch McConnell blocked was written by a Democrat and a Republican. It has bipartisan support. The Democrat who wrote that bill, along with Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford, knows how and when to work in a bipartisan way in the United States Senate. But this week, on the presidential debate stage, that senator was the most partisan Democrat in the debates because that senator refused to criticize any Democrats and only attacked Donald Trump. And here is that senator on the Senate floor today going after Mitch McConnell.
We are about to adjourn this day without passing election security legislation. We have bipartisan election security legislation. We've had that for years, and yet it has been stopped in every step of the way. Last week, my bill was offered by Senator Schumer on the floor. It could have gone to the president's desk that day. Instead, Leader McConnell objected. During his objection, he said that election legislation must be drafted with great care and on a bipartisan basis. We did that. Senator Warner is here. He worked on it. We did that with Senator Lankford, but we were blocked at the Rules Committee. We were blocked. That is a documented fact. The markup had been scheduled. It was ready to go. Senator Blunt had been willing to hold a markup on the bill, and it was stopped. I am going to tell that story every day until we advance this. I have an opportunity to do that, and I'm going to do it because people need to know what's going on. This should not be about partisanship or about what benefits what party. Do you think that's what the founders were thinking when they decided to declare independence from a foreign country? They were thinking of our country as one.
And here's a sample of Amy Klobuchar on the presidential debate stage trying to advance her candidacy without ever attacking another Democrat.
I have bold ideas, but they are grounded in reality. And yes, I will make some simple promises. I can win this. I'm from the Midwest, and I have won every race, every place, every time. And I will govern with integrity, the integrity worthy of the extraordinary people of this nation. So this is what I think we need to get done. We need the public option. That's what Barack Obama wanted, and it would bring health care costs down for everyone. People can't wait. I've got my friend Nicole out there whose son was actually died trying to ration rationed his insulin as a restaurant manager, and he died because he didn't have enough money to pay for it.
Senator,
and Bernie and I have worked on pharmaceutical issues together. We can get less expensive drugs. What's missing is the right person in the White House. Donald Trump wants to use these people as political pawns.
Thank you.
I was just in Flint, and they are still drinking bottled water in that town, and that is outrageous. But I don't think anyone can justify what this president is doing. Little kids literally woke up this weekend, turned on the TV, and saw their president calling their city, the town of Baltimore, nothing more than a home for rats. And I can tell you, as your president, that will stop. When he was just with Vladimir Putin at the G20, when he was asked about invading our democracy, he made a joke. We need someone that has people's back. We also need someone that can win. And I have won in these red districts. I win in the Midwest. I can win in states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa. And last, yes, I will govern with integrity. We have the president where people turn off their TV when they see him. Not me. I will make you proud as your president.
And then there was this moment when Amy Klobuchar was specifically invited to attack her competitors for the Democratic presidential nomination, and she would not do it.
You have said, when asked about your primary opponents, quote, a lot of people are making promises, and I'm not going to make promises just to get elected. Who on this stage is making promises just to get elected?
Everyone wants to get elected, but my point is this. I think when we have a guy in the White House that has now told over 10,000 lies, that we better be very straightforward with the American people.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and candidate for president. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And I want to just switch gears here for a moment on this breaking news that we're getting from Hyannisport. You worked with Ted Kennedy in the Senate, and now one of his nieces is reportedly died today. The news released by the family in Hyannisport, possibly from a drug overdose. And I just wanted to get your reaction to that.
Well, you just think of the tragedy that has hit this family, and it's just one thing after another. Obviously, we think of them today, but this problem of drug overdoses is happening all over this country right now. And certainly we know it here with Prince in Minnesota, but it's not just famous people. It's everyday people. And I talked about little Casey Joe, a champion swimmer in Minnesota at the end of the debate, who went into emergency room and got hooked. And her last words to her mom was, "Mama, it's not my fault." And she later died. This is happening because we got a lot of politicians talking about it, but just as I said in the debate, to be straightforward, these companies, if it was opioids, I don't know what happened in this tragic case, but if it was opioids, we know what happened here. The market was flooded by pharma companies. People turned to opioids and they turned to illegals, drugs, and they started taking those drugs, and they're dying. And those pharma companies had better be held responsible. It's one of the reasons I came out with a full plan for mental health and addiction, given my own family history with my dad, who had drunk driving convictions and finally got treatment. And in his words, he was pursued by grace, and it changed his whole life. I think everyone has that same right. So whenever I hear these stories, and again, we don't know exactly what happened, whether they are in famous families or not, it makes me think about that we could be doing a better job as a country, getting people into treatment, removing the stigma, and then making sure that the people that are responsible for this, which has been these drug companies, are paying for it.
Senator, I want to talk about the debate, and I want to make sure we reserve enough time to talk about what you were trying to achieve on the Senate floor today. To the debate, why didn't you do it? CNN wanted you to attack your competitors on that stage. They wanted you to, if you felt like it, to reach over and attack competitors who were going to be on the other stage that you weren't even on. But they really, really wanted you to do that. Why didn't you do it?
because I don't think this is a sporting event. I think there's more that unites our party that divides us. I do think we will have, as you've seen, legitimate discussions. I disagree with some of my colleagues, and I've made that clear, and I will continue to have disagreements with them on policy and make that clear, because I want to make the case I'm the best candidate. But we've got to use these debates, Lawrence, as a moment to take it to Donald Trump, because there are not just base Democrats watching those debates. There's independents, there's moderate Republicans. So there's a general election issue. But there's also the fact that I still believe that people want to hear from us about what differentiates us, what's the contrast, what's our own optimistic economic agenda. And if you spend the whole time just cutting down your opponents just to get that viral moment, then what have we done? We don't win. And we don't do better for this country. And so it's just a fundamental belief of mine that maybe I won't have that viral moment, or maybe I will. I had one once in the Kavanaugh hearing just because I did my job. And that's what I'm just not going to look for it by going after my opponents by saying mean things. I just don't think that's how you do it. Now, some people think this is some kind of test for how you can take on Donald Trump. As I said at that debate, one of my opponents once in a debate, Republican, said to me, "You're nothing but a street fighter from the Iron Range," and I said, thank you. I think you can show you're tough enough to take on Donald Trump without doing it against fellow Democrats.
Well, isn't one way to do it the way you did it in the debate, which is you show how you're going to take on Donald Trump by actually taking on Donald Trump during the debate?
Yes, that does seem to me to be a good idea. My favorite moment for me was when he called me Snow Woman after my announcement in the blizzard, and I had taken on climate change, and then he made fun of me for doing that in the snow. And so then I wrote back to him, I sent out a tweet, and it said, "The science is on my side on climate change, Donald Trump, and I'd love to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard." So I just think there are many ways to take this guy on, but you've got to show the absurdity of what he's done. And one of those is what we were talking about today on the Senate floor, and that is he gut-punched us on that election bill last year. Senator Langford, myself, and Senator Burr was on the bill, Warner, and basically the administration made calls directly, Don McGahn, the White House counsel, and stopped that bill. They called Republicans.
Let's listen to what the president said today about Russian interference in the election, since this is so relevant to what you were fighting for in the Senate floor today.
Robert Mueller said last week that Russia is interfering in U.S. elections right now. Did you raise that with Vladimir Putin?
Oh, you don't really believe this. Do you believe this?
You said it last week. Did you raise that with President Putin yesterday?
We didn't talk about that.
So there's the president of the United States saying, in effect, he doesn't believe that Russia interfered with the election, or Russia plans to interfere with the election. When he's confronted with that by Robert Mueller's testimony through a reporter, he says, "You don't really believe this."
Yeah. Same old thing. Robert Mueller said it under oath that the Russians are doing it as we speak. Trump's own FBI director, Christopher Wray, under my questioning and others just last week, said the same thing. His own intelligence director, Dan Coats, who is now sadly resigning, said that they are getting bolder. So it is undeniable that this is happening. They've done it through hacking, and they've done it through dirty propaganda online. And both of these things, we could take steps to decrease the possibility of this happening. And as I said today, this is about our democracy. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives on battlefields to protect our right to vote in our democracy. 4 little girls lost their life in a church in Birmingham at the height of the civil rights movement because we were standing up for our democracy. And so for this guy to just make jokes about it all the time, it's unpatriotic and it's un-American. And this can't wait for a new president, Lawrence. There are 11 states that don't have backup paper ballots. Anything we can do to push them to get those backup paper ballots. Some of them are partial, some don't have it at all. Because otherwise, we could have a presidential election and not know the outcome. And the second thing is making those social media companies tell us where the ads are coming from and who is paying for them, so that we can have a fair election. $4 billion, $3 to $4 billion is going to be spent. Your network, when you run ads, you got to say who's paying for those ads and what they are. Not true of Facebook or Google or Twitter or any of those companies. And their voluntary measures don't measure up to what you have to do on network TV or radio.
Senator, I know we're not going to hear the name Moscow Mitch on the Senate floor. Senate rules and customs don't allow that, and their senators don't really want to talk that way about each other, no matter how bad it gets. But the name does seem to be sticking, and it does seem to be sticking in politics in Kentucky to the point where there are now reports indicating that maybe Mitch McConnell will want to negotiate something with Amy Klobuchar when he gets back from the August recess.
Well, right now, Senator Lankford and I, and that actually was our bill that we did last year, hasn't been reintroduced because we continue to negotiate it. The bills that were blocked was a bill that I was leading with Senator Warner and others, and then Senator Wyden and I have a bill. But what this bill does is it requires backup paper ballots if you're going to take out any federal money for elections. So that would move those states to know that's what they have to do. And it has audit provisions. And so Senator Lankford and I just talked today. We're continuing to negotiate. My hope is that over the August break, as long as your viewers keep calling and demanding this and using whatever names they want, that maybe we can actually get this done.
Senator, I'm kind of speechless about what I saw happen in the Senate Judiciary Committee today, because I've never seen anything like it. I know you've never seen anything like it. It was a markup of a bill, and that's a process in which the committee votes on a bill. But whenever that happens, both sides get to speak about it, at minimum speak about it before there's a vote. Usually they get to amend it or offer amendments before there's a vote. Lindsey Graham just convened the committee and basically said, let's vote. Shocked Pat Leahy, who's had 40 years of service in the Senate, couldn't believe what he was seeing. What was your experience of what happened on your committee today?
Yeah, I was there for the entire hearing, and it was one of the saddest things that I'd ever seen. Senator Graham, as we pointed out, worked with us on that initial immigration bill when President Bush was in. Valiantly, we tried to get that done. He then supported the bill in 2013, comprehensive reform. And now he's just gone, when it comes to this issue, the full Trump, because what's happened here is we would like to work with him on, say, the issue of seeking asylum in those home countries of the Northern Triangle. But instead, he's put a bill forward that we have some issues with. And instead of just working with us, he rammed it through without amendments. And I had some great amendments on temporary status people that are here, domestic violence victims. And we weren't able to offer any amendments. I think he broke 4 rules just to get it through the committee on a partisan vote. And despite how vitriolic the immigration issue is right now, there are people of goodwill that have worked together on this in the Senate in the past and want to in the future. And that's why this was such a sad moment. The bill, I suppose, is now headed to the floor.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. It was great to be on.
Thank you. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.